everyone. Happy New Year and welcome to Grist with Abra Berens. Abra is the author of Grist, a practical guide to cooking grains, beans, seeds, and legumes. As some of you may know, January 6th is National Bean Day. How appropriate. She's here with us today to share healthy bean recipes with all of us. A little background about our author, Abra. Abra is a James Beard semi-finalist for Outstanding Chef in Great Lakes region and also the author of Ruffage. She shares more than 300 recipes and variations, plus substantial reference information to help you discover the next great grain. In this virtual presentation, Abra will present some of the healthy and excellent grain recipes in combination with the vegetables and lean proteins. Those who are interested in gluten-free recipes will find this a great presentation to attend. Now I will hand it over to Abra. Abra, everything is with you now. Here is Abra, and I will just get out of video and audio, then everybody can hear you well. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to the program.
Well, Uma, thank you so much for having me. It's a treat to be back, and someday we'll be able to do these in person again. So I appreciate everything that you've done to host me. So and all the programming.
Yeah, and also I forgot to share such a happy news for you. Like Abra just got a baby boy. His name is Lark.
Yeah, it's true. I know when we first started emailing, I think it took me a long time to get back to you because I wasn't in front of a computer for quite a little while. But yeah, we're back and happy and healthy and all that stuff. So yeah.
Thank you. Everything is yours now. Go ahead.
Thank you. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Uma was saying, I am the author of Grist. This is what the cover looks like. And it is very much a sibling book to Ruffage. The first book that I wrote, Ruffage, is a practical guide to vegetables and is so much about my time farming and my love of vegetables and how to prepare them and how to, kind of have different meals come out of these same ingredients that we have over the course of the year in the northern Midwest here in Michigan. And when I sat down to write the second book, I knew that the format would be the same because for better, for worse, that's the way that I think and the way that I, kind of work through different ingredients is getting excited about something, either because of how it's grown or how it's produced, and then use it in my kitchen every week. And so this book, if Ruffage was so much about my time growing vegetables, this book has a lot more to do with the stories of the other people who are growing these ingredients. So all of these ingredients are really things that are grown on a larger scale, and they're much more pantry staples than something like vegetables, which we're buying, a couple times a week and then featuring in different ways. So it was a really different book to write in that it went from kind of these seasonal things that pop in and out to something that we really have access to year round. So for those of you who haven't seen the book, either book in person, the way that it's organized is each chapter is an ingredient. And so there's an opening section that talks about that ingredient with different information about, is it gluten-free? How long does it take to cook? The general yield after it's cooked, things like that. And then there's a different preparation technique. So I always say the way that my brain kind of works is that it's almost like a NCAA basketball bracket in reverse. So we start with the winner, which is the ingredient. So for tonight's demonstration, it's going to be beans. So we'll start with beans, and then we'll look at different ways to prepare it, whether that's, in this case, boiling it or stewing it or, lots of different ways to do it. And then from there, we change how the dish feels based on what flavors are going with it. So you can have effectively the same structure of a dish that has different flavor components, and it feels very different. So each recipe can really be varied in any number of ways. And I've given at least 3 variations to every recipe so that you have ideas for spring, summer, fall, and winter. Because again, most of these ingredients are things that are shelf stable, so we have access to them year round. They have their own seasons, but that's not really how we use them. In addition to the recipes and the information about cooking the ingredients, there are several interviews with different producers. This book was very much written at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, really in the spring of 2020. And then following the social upheaval after the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, there were so many things that our world was grappling with, not least of all our issues surrounding food. I think we all can remember, the days when there wasn't flour on the shelves because there had been a run on flour because everybody was making sourdough, or all of the canned beans were gone. And so maybe we bought up dried beans and we're cooking them in our kitchens for the first time. All of those sorts of things combined with ideas about food access and where do these ingredients come from, were very much at the forefront of my mind as I was writing it. And so a lot of those stories are told by the growers themselves. How is growing black beans on the west side of Michigan as a commodity crop different than growing Crowder peas at an urban farm in Detroit? Both of those growers are effectively bean growers in the state of Michigan, but their stories and how they grow, why they grow, what they do with them couldn't be more different. And so I think it's really important for us as consumers to think about the people who are growing this food. Their successes and their hurdles directly affect our access to food and what's on our plate. And so I think it's important to hear those stories. So there's little vignettes of those along the way. There's also stories there's a lot of invisible jobs on the kind of path to these different ingredients. So there's an interview with a seed cleaner, someone who is the, kind of necessary middle point between growing grain and having grain in a finished product, whether that's as flour for bread or, distilled into whiskey. Carl Wagner is a critical part, at least for our farm. And so it's telling his story, as well as the story of a miller and kind of what goes into milling wheat into flour. So those are all of the components of the book. And the thing that was the most exciting to me about this book is that a lot of these ingredients are sort of humble staples, that don't get a lot of fanfare. And they're becoming a larger part of a lot of our diets as we look for, meat-free meals or lower meat meals, things with lower carbon footprints, or we just, are excited about them and want to see what it's like to, make a big pot of beans and make it last throughout the week. All of these ingredients are really, kind of set up to be cooked in large batches and used throughout the week. So also throughout the book, there are different kind of weeks with an ingredient without boredom. So the recipe that I'm going to demonstrate in the video is like one of many days of eating a pot of beans. And so there's lots of ways that you can kind of cook something once and eat it up a bunch of different ways throughout the week, hopefully making it easier to meal plan and also pretty fast. So for me, in my household, I generally do a lot of cooking on Saturday and Sunday. And then throughout the week, we're still kind of figuring out this parenting thing. And so sometimes that means dinners are coming together. They need to come together really quickly because we have limited windows between crying and sleeping. And so trying to make the most of those. So the way that this presentation will go, I pre-recorded the demonstration. So I will share my screen in a second and then let that run. And I'll be available if you have questions. You can put your questions into the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, and I'll try to answer them as I go. And then after the video, we'll come back and we'll do a live Q&A. It's a small enough group that we can do that. And so if you have questions, you can also save them for the end, and I'll do my best to answer them in real time. So without further ado, I'm back So let's do that. So dried beans are one of the things that we make at least once a week around here. They're really affordable. They come in a variety of different like colors and textures and shapes and all those things. They are another grain that really takes to a variety of flavors really well. You can see I'm talking about beans. The dog comes running. She just loves them too. Yeah. And so anyway, dried beans are there's a lot of confusion around them. Do you need to soak them? Do they have to be done in an Instapot? Can you like blah, 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 blah. How much work are they? And in general, I think kind of a good rundown on beans are that they're dried fully so that they can be shipped without anything going off in the process. So they're a very shelf-stable product. That said, a lot of the beans that you find in an average sort of like bottom shelf of the grocery store can have a fair amount of age on them because they're pooled from different places. So they can be upwards of 3 to 5 years old, which is why a lot of times people advocate for soaking beans. And what the soaking does is it's just going to even everything out and speed everything along. So one of the biggest complaints about beans is that they take forever to cook, which is why the benefits of Instapot and things like that are so kind of lauded. But by soaking them, it's going to cut the cooking time in half about. And that's because you're rehydrating these things that have been dehydrated. So if you were to look, we're going to cook some black-eyed peas today, which even though they're called peas, they're technically a bean. It's, again, another added level of confusion for the bean process. So these are black-eyed peas, and they are just a really standard kind of smaller pea. They've got clearly the black eyes to them. This process would be the same if it were for black beans or yellow-eyed peonies or calypsos or Christmas limas, any of those fancy beans. And then these are the ones that I soaked just a few hours ago, so it hasn't even been that long. And you can really see the difference in the size. And that's what's going to happen. So beans are going to about double in size from either when they're cooked or when they're soaked. And so you're going from a really dried, shelf-stable product to something that's activated and is moisture dense again, and it's giving you that volume. If they're soaked, then they're going to not get too much bigger in the cooking process because they've already absorbed that moisture into them. So instead of having to add the moisture and the heat to cook the starches out, you're just cooking the starch out with the heat of it. And so if you're kind of getting a sense for how much per person, I would say if it's a full meal, a half a cup of dried beans per person, that's going to yield about a cup or so of the cooked beans. If you're having it with something else, I would say about a quarter cup per person. But that said, there's no downside in cooking a bunch of beans in one sort of go because you can then use them throughout the week to make different things. And I think batch cooking gets sort of a bad rep because you get bored of eating that thing. So if you make a gallon of lentil soup because you can make it all in one go, but then you're eating lentil soup every day for like 3 weeks and you just like want to like crawl over hot coals rather than eat another bowl of lentil soup. But if you were to just cook a bunch of lentils, then you could make soup out of the cooked lentils. You could put them with lentils and rice. You could put them under, a seared piece of fish or something like that. You have more options. And so that's what we're doing with the beans today. So this is a really straightforward, I'm going to boil up some beans. I'm going to add onion, garlic, and celery to it. But you can also just do it with plain water. And you don't need to add other flavors to it as well. Anytime you're adding additional flavor, you're going to have more flavor in it, and that's nice. It's also a nice way to use up any of the odds and ends. So if you've got, vegetable scraps that you've been saving or a veg stock, I don't tend to cook beans in a chicken stock or even in a veg stock really, because I think they're generally so flavorful that it makes it feel kind of muddy to me. And it's just another place where I guess I'd rather just use chicken stock to make chicken soup, and I don't know that it benefits the dish that much, but to each his own, do as you please. To build the boiling pot of it, I'm going to take a pot and then add these soaked beans, and you can either drain the soaking liquid off and replace it with fresh liquid if you want to. This does not look particularly cloudy to me. It doesn't have a bunch of bubbles on it, so I'm probably not going to bother, and I'm just going to pour it into my pot. And then the thing is that you want to just cover the beans with enough liquid to cover it by a couple of inches. So that's going to change the amount of liquid depending on the size of your pot, the volume of your pot, all those things. But you just want to have enough liquid so that you don't have to pay too much attention, because they're going to absorb a bit more of that liquid. It's going to evaporate off during the cooking process, and you just don't want to run out of it, because then it's going to burn and they also won't cook evenly. And that's the other thing about soaking beans, is that it means that the beans are going to cook more evenly because they're kind of coming to the same starting point. So if you have a particularly old bean and a particularly new bean, they're going to cook at different rates. But if they've been rehydrated, they're sort of coming up to the same level. So then they're going to cook pretty evenly. But if you run out of liquid, then the ones that are at the bottom of the pot that still have liquid in them will be able to cook faster than the ones that are going to dry out on top, if that makes sense. So we've got our beans in our pot with some water. This is one of the few times where we're not going to add salt at the very get-go. Most of the time we add salt at the very beginning of the process, but this is a time when it's a bit of an old tale, but I also think that there's a reason why wives knew so much, and so I like to listen to it, which is that salt and acid will toughen the skins of beans. And so if you ever have had those beans where you're like, ugh, I just can't like chew this thing, it might have been that. That's also a sign of age of the dried bean, and different things like that. So beans in the water, no salt, and I usually wait to add acid afterwards. And so what I'll do is I'll take a couple ribs of celery. And I don't even use fancy cuts. I like to cut them, I don't know, what is this, like an inch wide, 3/4 of an inch, chunks basically. And you're just gonna pop those in. Like anything, the more surface area that you have for the flavors to leach out. So if you've got real broad, wide cuts, it's probably going to get more of that flavor out of it. If it's really, left whole and it has to penetrate, it's going to take longer and you're not going to leach as much out. But there's really just not a right or wrong way to do it. And I feel like so rarely is there a place where I'm cooking that I can just have like great big hunks of stuff. And so I like to kind of really revel in that. These are a few cloves of garlic. I've been real big on garlic lately, so I'm going to put all 3 of these in here, even though they're big. If you're not a big garlic person, then go ahead and use less or don't use it at all. And I'm just checking it. These have been in storage for a little bit, so I'm going to cut away any bad bits. Some people swear that the germ in the garlic or the sprout gets really bitter. It doesn't tend to bother me that much, so I'm not going to bother that much with it. And a couple ways that you can do it. You can either really just like smash it with your knife and kind of bash it up to release those flavors, and then also to give it more surface area to let those flavors come out. Or you can just give it a quick chop, just glancing at it to see if you find any bits. Using up food that is maybe on its way out, you have to just be a little bit more diligent about getting any of the bad bits off. All right, so our celery's in there, our garlic's in there. Same for the onion. So these are storage onions that I clearly didn't store very well. You can see it's starting to try to root out. This one I think has the like green sprout that's coming out. These are just these onions thinking that it's spring, so that I probably had them too cold and then I brought them out, or there's a temperature change and so they're like, oh, it's been winter and now it's spring, it's time to send up our shoots. So nothing wrong with them, but they're not going to store that long because the plant is trying to grow again. It means that it's not kind of in its buttoned up hibernation state. It's really like opening itself up and looking for the sun, which means it's more vulnerable to going off. So anytime you see something like this, I still use these, but you want to use them faster than if you had, a new onion that had perfectly tight skin and really wasn't showing any of those signs. So it's another kind of example of triaging your vegetables and getting to know them a little bit and know when you have to use them versus when they're going to hold tight for you in the crisper drawer. If you do start to see signs of your onions going to sprout like this and you're concerned that you're not going to be able to make it through them, there's sort of two ways that I will salvage onions. One, get them into even colder storage. So I don't often store onions in the fridge, but if they start to sprout, I will, just to kind of trick them back into thinking that it was, it was nice out and then it got cold again. Like all the rest of us get tricked by that too. Or you can cook them down and then freeze them. So if that's making a bunch of caramelized onions that then you would put into little ice cubes or into smaller containers and freeze, or just sweating them, and then you have that for a base for soups and stocks and things like that, without any of that work. That's a good way to salvage them should you have a ton of onions that you need to process through without losing. All right, so in our pot, we've got the black-eyed peas that were soaked. We've got the onions and garlic and celery and enough water that it's, the level of the water is about 1 inch or 2 inches above where the beans are. And then we're just gonna put it onto the burner. Again, no salt, no acid in it. And then bring it up to a boil, reduce it to a simmer, and cook them until they're tender. All right, so for our next trick, we're gonna make a really nice relish to go over the top of these beans. So, I was saying that you don't add acid or salt until after the beans are cooked, which oftentimes once these beans are fully cooked, we're gonna put some salt into the liquid and then let it sit for about 10 minutes. And that will allow the salt to kind of penetrate the inside of the beans and really make a flavorful broth. I very rarely actually add an acid directly to that cooking liquid. I'm not really sure why, besides the fact that then that flavor is with it, and when you reheat it, or if you heat it later in the week, that flavor is going to dissipate some. And so I like to add something super bright and acidic to the end, right as a top, as a garnish. I really have this deep love for condiments, and so you can kind of flip it in and out. This one is going to have parsley and lemon and olive oil and salt. You could add grated garlic to it. You could add ginger to it. You could make it with rosemary. You could make it with oregano. You could make it with mint and add some almonds for the fat. Any of those sorts of things. It's infinitely riffable, but it's just sort of like a kind of tangy, salty, fatty rig that's going to go over the top. So to do that, we've got our zester. Take a bowl. Take your lemon that's been washed. You could also do this with grapefruit. I think sometimes adding in a little bit of orange zest is nice because it kind of adds depth of flavor to the lemon. And you're just zesting it straight into a bowl. If you don't have a zester like this, you can use a vegetable peeler and just take wide strips off of it and then mince it with the knife, different things like that. Knock the zest that's attached to it out, cut it in half. And I find sometimes the easiest way, so that you don't have to scoop the seeds out later, you could juice it with a juicer and then strain the seeds, but also just like pitzing them out with the tip of the knife is pretty good too. You can also cut the lemon the other direction. So I cut this lemon around its equator. You could go top down into quarters and then just cut the seeds from the center if you wanted as well. There's a million ways to skin a cat, as that terrible saying goes, to get the same results. So seeds are out mostly. There's one hiding in there still. There we go. Another way to avoid getting the seeds into stuff is you can squeeze the lemon upside down so that then the seeds aren't coming out. I find it actually doesn't always work well for me. As you can just tell, I just dropped a seed in there. So I like to juice it over my hands. Ooh, I have a little cut. So you'll be able to tell wherever you have a cut in your hand almost immediately. And I would say an average lemon has about 1.5 ounces, which is about, just shy of a 1/4 cup or 3 tablespoons of juice. In there, if you got a smaller lemon, you'll get less juice. Larger lemon, more juice. Give your hands a quick rinse to get that off. And then we're going to add some salt to let that start to dissolve in the lemon itself. You could add garlic or shallot or any of those things to it right now if you want to. We've already got some onions in our beans, so I don't think we need to add any more. And then some olive oil. And I really like to not mess around with the cute little dribbles of it and just go ahead and go all in. I like about 50-50 olive oil to lemon juice. So if you've got 1.5 ounces of lemon juice, you're looking for 1.5 ounces of olive oil. That looks about right. That's why it's nice to have a clear container. You can kind of look at it and see. And then I'm going to add parsley to it right now. If you're not going to use it for a little bit, add the parsley just before you're going to serve it and use it. So having this like lemon olive oil mixture, and then you can add the herbs to it. The longer the herbs sit in that super acidic dressing, they're going to oxidize and turn brown. Doesn't mean that they're rotten, doesn't mean that they're going to make you sick. It just means that they're not as beautiful. And so if you can wait to add it, that's a nice thing. It'll be bright, peppy green. But we're going to eat this whole thing up, so we don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to take my parsley off. Parsley stems are also really good to go into bean cooking liquid, really flavorful, but tend to be a little bit coarser and harder to chew than like cilantro stems. And so I'll usually save them for that. I also really like to use both parsley and cilantro stems to make an aromatic salt or green salt. And to do that, I just take usually a food processor if I'm going to use it, or just mix it by hand, chop it really, really finely, and then mix it with 4 parts salt, 1 part sugar. So if it were, say, a cup of salt, you would have 1/4 cup of sugar to it. And then all of these different green things, you could add chili flakes or lemon zest or any of those things, and just probably like 1/4 cup total of those. And then the salt will preserve it. So you get the flavor of the parsley and the lemon and all those different things kind of embedded in the salt, and then you can use that. So if you find yourself with a ton of parsley stems that you really need to like find a home for, not a problem that like most people seem to have, but I seem to be plagued with it, so this is why I've come up with it. That's another way to do it, or just make a lot of this sort of relish with the lemon juice and the olive oil. All right, so that's all pretty well minced up. It doesn't have to be, you know, French bistro fine, but just a bit. Put it on top. All right. And then we're just giving it a good stir, and that's going to be our topping for the cooked beans. As simple as that. So our beans have just come up to a boil. I'm going to turn it down to a simmer and then just let them go. I find that a bean this size is generally going to take 20, 25, 30 minutes to cook through after it's been soaked. If it hasn't been soaked, I would start checking them at that point, but they're going to take longer than that. And again, to check for the kind of doneness of the grain itself, the easiest way, I mean, you can eat one, and if it's undercooked, it's not going to hurt you any. It's just not that pleasant. Otherwise, just cut it in half on a cutting board, and you'll see you want an even coloring through the center. So you don't want any hard, chalky line of uncooked bean in the center. It's going to be really soft and creamy, and again, very inviting to eat. So that's what we're going to go for. So these are our cooked beans. Now you can see that the onions are translucent, the celery is soft, the garlic is soft enough that if you were to pick it up, you can kind of just mush it straight together with your fingers. So that's cooked into submission. And then the beans themselves, why don't I get a spoon instead of just putting my fingers in everything all the time? The beans themselves, they're going to be a little bit darker in color because of the black-eyed pea is going to make this sort of like darker liquid. And then when you go to pick them up, they smush, but they're still holding their shape, so they're not cooked all the way down to broken down, but there's no hard, chalky line through the center. So these are our beans. We're going to put them back onto the burner, and I like to add like the salt right at the end, and then let them sit overnight. So these beans were actually cooked yesterday, and now they've had a chance to sit overnight with that salt, so the salt can penetrate the center of the bean. All of those flavors equalize. There used to be a restaurant I knew up in Northport that would sell yesterday's soup, because soup always tastes better the next day as opposed to the day that you make it. Same is true for your pot of beans. So if you get a chance to think ahead, make a big pot of beans on a Sunday or a Monday, then you can have it for later in the week. They're also going to be super flavorful if you have them on the night, but this is a good way to kind of get ahead for the day. So we're going to get this heating up. So got our burner on. Again, a kind of wider, flatter pot for reheating it will reheat faster because you've got broader surface area, and it doesn't have to heat as deep of a pot of liquid. So you're just spreading that volume out over a shallower thing. It's going to heat a lot faster. And then we're going to take this head of escarole. Escarole is a chicory. It's going to have a little bit of bitterness to it. This is not super bitter. You could certainly use something like kale or collards or whatever. And I'm just pulling these outer leaves off, I guess really out of habit, because we're going to wilt this in there. So this is a good time to think about the difference between wilty and rotty. So this looks like it's just kind of floppy and wilty, and it is because I've had it in the fridge and I didn't put it in a bag or any sort of like protective layer, so it got wind whipped by the fan in the fridge. But normally if I were making a salad out of this, I would say it's not going to be a really nice texture because it's so wilty, but we're just going to wilt it anyway. So there's no reason to discard these leaves because they're just sort of pre-wilted before we wilt them again. So we're going to take these and just give them a quick rough chop. I don't like to go too fine on it, but just keep a nice amount. And then if these did have any sort of rot to them, like a real dark brown or anything that was like slimy or stinky, then there's not really a ton you can do to bring them back. So the best thing you can do is to try to catch them before they get to that point. So that's our escarole. We're going to cut up the rest of the head. Sometimes it's easier to cut it at an angle because it's a big, thick head. And this looks like it's a crazy amount of escarole or greenery to go into it, but it's going to wilt down so much that it's really nice to have a volume of it. And it's good. Whoa. It's good to have a lot of greens in your diet. So this is a good way to just really sop them up. So our beans are now up to a nice rolling simmer. So I'm going to take all of these greens and I'm just going to kind of set them in. And if I knew where the lid, yep, here it is, then I'm going to pop that just on top and let it kind of soften the whole thing. Maybe turn this down just a touch while I grab my bowl. And so at this point, I would probably start toasting some bread. I would cut it really thick, maybe inch to at least a ½ inch thick, and then get it into your toaster so that you get a nice crunch on the outside, but then it's going to be real soft and squishy on the inside. Rub that with a little bit of garlic or some olive oil or something would be really nice. And then you'll have that alongside. So this is kind of just a big one bowl sort of dinner. You could add grated Parmesan to it. You could add some cheddar cheese or something like that to it. I don't really see the need today. I'm not feeling it. So I'm just going to keep it vegan. I'm going to keep it just beans and escarole and then our relish over the top. But you can certainly gild the lily by adding any of those flavors too. And so now you can see the escarole has gone to kind of a bright green color, but it's very soft in texture. So if you go to pick it up, you can see it's like kind of floppy, but the green itself is cooked through and real bright in color. So I think that that is good enough for me. So we're going to turn our burner off. And let's just give it a quick taste. You never really know how the salt and things are after they sit, so you just have to taste things over and over and over again. That is nice. Speaking of, food waste and adding salt or cheese to it, If you had a bunch of Parmesan rinds that were sitting around, you could certainly add that to the bean cooking liquid, and that would make a really nice kind of salty, rich kind of broth to it too. And just ladling it up. And you can see now too, the escarole has almost gone translucent around the edges. And so that means, again, it's just cooked all the way through, but not so far that you're eating, bad cafeteria cooked greens. They still have some texture to it, but they're going to be nice and kind of silken handkerchief style greens. Got those big chunks of garlic from that, and then we're going to take our parsley, lemon, olive oil mixture. And this is, again, adding the brightness of the lemon, but also the richness and the flavor of the olive oil. So because we're not going to heat the olive oil at all, this is when, if you have a real fancy olive oil that you've been, just kind of wondering what you should do with it, this is the time. Because you're really getting that bright flavor of the olive oil. And there's just so few ingredients in this dish. What do we got? We've got beans, we've got some onion, some garlic, some celery, water, if you want to count that as an ingredient, escarole, lemon, parsley, and olive oil. That's 9 ingredients, including water, salt, I guess, 10. It's a 10 ingredient thing. So each ingredient is really going to shine itself. I think I said beans. That's definitely the most important one. But they're each going to shine. And so you can use the best quality ingredients that you have. And that doesn't always mean the most pristine. It just means the best of what you have. So if you're making this and you have a really nicely raised heirloom bean versus a random pinto bean that you got at the store, go for the heirloom one. If you've got a really nice olive oil, use that one. But if you don't have a really nice olive oil, use whatever olive oil you have, or use a neutral one, and the lemon and the parsley are going to carry it too. So it's kind of that constant cost benefit analysis of what you're using. But I think the simplicity of this really lends itself to scooping up those better things. And then dump your bread in the side, and that's dinner. All right, I am back, and I have not had a chance to look in the chat because I couldn't see it while sharing my screen. So I'm going to look now. And the question that I've gotten is whether or not you can pressure cook the beans. So you absolutely could pressure cook the beans. I don't have a pressure cooker, so I don't know, or an Instapot for that matter. So I don't know much about the settings for that and things like that. You just want to have enough liquid to then be able to build out the rest of that flavor and wilt those greens. But yeah, anything, any way that you want to cook them, as long as there's some additional liquid in it, should be just fine.
Okay. I don't see any other questions here.
Yeah, I don't.
Oh yeah, just now.
All right, where do I purchase my beans from? So there's a couple different places. A lot of times I'm still buying them at the grocery store and whatever is available. I just bought 2 bags of chickpeas from, I think it's La Preferida or something like that, from the grocery store. If I'm gonna look for some specialty beans, there's a couple of different vendors. I work at a farm called Grainer Farm in Southwest Michigan, so I buy the beans that we grow there. There is also a Michigan bean producer called Sheridan Acres, and they have an online store that is really nice. And so they are doing a really great job of, Kevin Messing is the farmer there, and he is converting his family's, I think he's 4th generation farmer, from, traditional row crops into organic and heirloom beans. So he's doing some really cool varieties of beans, and they're really easy to have shipped to you through his site. I also will order beans. Rancho Gordo out of California has a really great selection. They've been in the bean business for 20 years and have great relationships with growers. There's also Anson Mills down in the south and Zuursoen in Iowa. In the back of Grist, there are several sourcing, sort of couple pages of different sources so you can get them there. But yeah, I would say in Michigan, I would get them from Sheridan Acres. And again, that's SHERIDAN Acres. And I can put that in the chat too.
Yeah, thank you. That will be helpful.
And so sorry, let me just type that in right now. And Zursoon just did a big website update, and so it's easier to order through them for retail now than it ever has been. The other question,
okay, I think you have sent it to only panelists, not attendees, I think. Okay, can you take one? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to go to everybody.
Thank you.
Now everybody knows what it looks like when I type. It's very focused. So the other question is if you could make this with any other bean besides black-eyed peas. Absolutely. You could make this with any bean that you have on your shelf. If you make it with black beans, the liquid is going to be a little bit more black and kind of inky in color. And so the greens themselves won't show quite as well. But you could certainly use something like a red bean or as appealing. But
yeah, there is one more question, I think. Whether you have, what is the most nutritional bean?
That's a good question. I actually don't know. So I'm going to do a little cheater answer, which is I would say the most nutritional bean is the one that you are eating. Because if you don't eat them, then you don't get any nutrition. It's sort of a cheeky answer. One of the things I was really surprised about in writing this book was realizing, Americans are very focused on the amount of protein that they get in their diets, and realizing that all of these ingredients have protein in them, some more than others. So, but even, rice, which I feel like gets sort of written off as being a carbohydrate or a filler, rice has protein in it. It's about 3%, whereas something like a soybean is upwards of mid 20%. I can't remember if it's like 4% or something. So any of the legumes, which are, beans, peas, lentils, chickpeas, things like that, are all going to have a higher protein count than the grains will, but even the grains will have it too. And so, something like wheat, when people talk about gluten and being gluten intolerant, that's a protein. So that's a form of protein that you're getting, even with something, that's been as much maligned as pasta, that pasta is not a health food. And I don't know, maybe it's not a health food, but you're still getting some of that protein to it. The other thing about beans and a lot of vegetables is that they also are, a lot of those micronutrients are fat soluble. So they need a little bit of fat to be able to be digested by your body. And so that's where something like that olive oil dressing that was demonstrated in the video is also really valuable. I mean, it makes everything taste good. That is tasty. But also it makes it easier for those nutrients to be absorbed by your body. So it can be really lead to good gut health too.
Okay, thank you very much. And also I use a lot of bean because I won't eat meat or eggs or nothing. And so proteins are the beans for us. And so I grew up with the bean, lot of lentils, like all kinds of lentils we use, even this black-eyed beans. That's why usually what I do pressure cook all the bean. We have a pressure cooker, like a natural pressure cooker, not Instapot. It's a pressure cooker, so Indian pressure cooker style, and I just put all the bean and cook it. And
yeah, and I have heard that, and again, I don't have any data to follow this up, but I have heard from people that pressure cooking is because they cook for less time, there's less nutrition lost in the cooking process. And so some people have said that that's the most nutritious way to cook them. Again, I haven't done that research, so I can't vouch for it, but certainly people have been using pressure cookers for a long time and really love them. So yeah, that's a great way. Plus it's so fast.
Yeah, it's so fast. That's the reason, but I don't know how healthy it is or not. And it's really fast to cook any bean. So that's a black-eyed bean. Not even, this is a soup healthy way you showed, but there is another way, like a deep fry, like a fritters. You can do that with this bean and it come out really good, actually.
And that's the thing is, I think that there's a lot of ways that we're told that we should eat, but I really believe that eating should be a really joyful experience. And even as someone who has been navigating any number of body issues, having just had a baby, I think that it's certainly something where a little bit of fat in your diet, or in the recipes in the book, there's a lot of categories for fried things, and that can be something like a shallow fry, which makes it really crunchy and gives you a lot of texture, or something like a deep fried fritter. And I think there's a lot of different ways to eat, and usually when that's paired with especially a lot of vegetables, it still makes me feel pretty good about what I'm eating.
That's a nice way to say. That is a good thing. I know, because this is really, I'm feeling hungry actually. This is really good, very tasty what you showed, and it looks really yummy. I'm going to try this way.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that anytime that something is really brothy, it's really nice, especially this time of year when it's so cold outside.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah, we love soups during winter time. And the perfect recipe for this winter. This is the perfect recipe thing. And I hope everybody has enjoyed it. I don't see any other questions or feedbacks. I think we really enjoyed it.
Sorry, there's a question, Uma, that you're probably better at answering than I am. JG asks if dal can be made with beans instead of lentils also. So I know dal only as a lentil dish, but is there a dal that's made with beans instead of lentils?
Dal means it's like a dish, right? A dal means a dish, and it makes out of lentils. Not normally. This is like it's not dal means lentils. There are different kinds of Indian lentils. A lot of Indian variety of lentils, so we can make a dal out of it. Yes.
Okay.
But
and is there a name for an Indian dish that's made with beans instead of lentils?
It is a rajma. This dal, whatever this rajma, dal means lentils, like a bean. There is another, like dal means whatever dal, bean in Hindi language, dal.
Okay.
Lentils and whatever dal, whatever bean, we call it in English bean, dal means lentils. In that language, in our colloquial language, dal means that's the thing. So when you make out of bean or lentils, whatever dish you make, like if you add onions, tomatoes, or whatever you told, like garlic and all that stuff, it makes dal. So that is the dal. It doesn't have, it's a name of the dish. Make whatever dish you make out of bean or lentils, whatever it is, it's called dal.
Okay, gotcha.
So each dal has different name when you add different ingredients. That's all.
Okay, gotcha. Oh man, now I just want to stop.
I know. And some lentils we can make very nice. Wow, I love dals. Any lentils, any bean, I love that. Yeah. Right. And the red kidney beans, you make what is that we call with for winter? What do you make for during winters? You make with the red kidney bean, red color.
Yeah. Let's see, how do I use red kidney beans? I think they're the classic bean for like a chili. where
Chili,
people
yeah, that's the chili.
powder
So
stuff.
we make something like chili, but without using any meat or any chicken broth, just as you told, just like water, we pressure cook it and add a lot of like spices and vegetable, basically like onions, tomatoes, and garlic, and we use a lot of spices in it. Lot of Indian spices like a pepper, like coriander, so many powders we use in that, and so that gives good flavor to that.
Yeah, the best flavors.
Yeah, thank you. I love this too. Yeah, really. So I'm going to try this way one time with black-eyed beans. Yeah, definitely. We really enjoyed this program, and we love to have you more. Write a lot of books, and we want more recipes from you.
I'll do that. I'll go back to my editor and say we have to do a third book because Uma says so.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, somebody asked, can this presentation recorded be played? Yes, it is. It is recorded, and we will be playing on you. When you go to our library's YouTube page, it will be there, but not today, right away, but maybe after, like a tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Definitely when you go and see our CMPL YouTube page, then you will see this video on it. And thank you very much again, Abra. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for attending this program. And we will again see you. I think Abra will be writing another book soon, hopefully,
yeah,
right? Yeah, so we will be again meeting soon.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your night.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Bye.